Imagine yourself lost in a forest, buried under snow. The wind cuts like blades, the cold burns your skin, and the silence is so deep that even your breath sounds like a scream. But suddenly, something moves among the trees. A sound, half howl, half moan. And then, that smell. The stench of rotting flesh, coming from somewhere in the darkness. You try to run, but you can feel eyes watching you. With every step, the presence draws closer, and something inside you whispers that it's not human. The ancients called it the Wendigo, the ravenous spirit that haunts the frozen forests of the north. They say it's born when a man, consumed by hunger and despair, feeds on the flesh of another human being. And in that unholy act, he loses his soul and gains a new form. A tall, skeletal creature with sunken eyes, razor-sharp teeth, and an eternal hunger that can never be satisfied. But what is the Wendigo, really? A legend meant to warn us about greed and survival, or something real, still lurking in the white silence of the Canadian and American wilderness, waiting for its next victim? Would you dare to listen to the whispers in the wind, knowing they might not be just the wind? To understand the Wendigo, we must go back long before modern horror stories ever existed. This creature comes from the ancient traditions of the Algonquin peoples, a group of indigenous nations who lived in the northeastern United States and eastern Canada, lands marked by brutal winters, dense forests, and long periods of scarcity. Among the Ojibwe Cree and Innu, the Wendigo wasn't just a monster. It was a warning, a spiritual force that embodied the dangers of greed, isolation, and human despair. They said the Wendigo appeared when cold and hunger consumed the tribe, when the instinct to survive began to clash with one as humanity. If someone gave in to the temptation of eating human flesh to stay alive, something horrifying would happen. Their body would twist and shrink. Their skin would tighten over their bones, and an endless hunger would take hold of their soul. That person would stop being human and become the Wendigo, the spirit of eternal hunger. But there's something even more disturbing about this legend. Not every Wendigo was born from cannibalism. In some versions, it was a spirit of winter that possessed weak souls, corrupting their thoughts until they lost control. It could hide inside anyone, silently waiting for the perfect moment to take over their mind. Over time, the myth spread among hunters, settlers, and travelers, taking on new shapes. Some described it as a towering creature with glowing eyes and a heart made of ice. Others said it was invisible, a presence betrayed only by the wind, a cold whisper threading through the trees. The Wendigo, then, is far more than just a monster of folklore. It's a symbol of unending hunger, of the corruption of the human spirit, and the terror of losing what makes us human. And that's why, even after centuries, this legend still chills us to the bones. Because, in the end, the Wendigo isn't only out there in the woods. It's the darkness that might already be inside us. They say it all began during a winter that never ended. The snow fell endlessly, covering the world in white silence. The game disappeared, the rivers froze, and the wind howled through the trees like the cries of lost souls. In one of those isolated villages, a group of hunters became trapped in the mountains. No food, no shelter, no hope. At first, they tried to endure. They ate whatever remained, frozen roots, the leather from their boots, even strips of hide they used to keep warm. But despair is a treacherous thing. One night, when the fire went out and the cold consumed everything, one of them did the unthinkable. And that night, the sound that echoed in the cabin wasn't the wind, it was the sound of flesh being cut. When the sun rose, they said that man was no longer the same. His eyes were hollow, his skin clung tightly to his bones, and an unbearable stench filled the air. He began to mutter to himself, then to laugh, and finally, he vanished into the blizzard. Days later, the others heard footsteps outside, slow, dragging, and something large circling the cabin. When they opened the door, they saw enormous footprints in the snow, but the shape wasn't human. It was as if sharp bones had pierced the ground with every step. From that day on, the stories began. People swore they'd seen a creature tall as the trees, with horns, glowing eyes, and a mouth that never closed, as though it was trying to devour the world itself. Others said it had no physical form at all. It was the wind, the hunger, the fear. A cold whisper at your ear, calling the name of anyone left too long alone. You're hungry, aren't you? And those who heard that whisper, who let the fear in, began to change. They lost their appetite for food, then for sleep. And soon, the voice of the Wendigo became irresistible. It awakened the darkest thing inside each of them, the instinct to survive at any cost. The elders warned their people, never speak his name in the forests, never talk about his hunger, and above all, never walk alone. But of course, there are always those who doubt, hunters who mock the stories, explorers who call it superstition, until one night they hear a branch crack and feel a cold that doesn't come from the air, but from something standing right behind them. And by the time they turn around, it's already too late. The Wendigo doesn't chase, it watches. And when you finally see it, it's because it has already chosen you. And from that moment on, the hunger never ends. Over the centuries, the Wendigo stopped being just a story whispered around campfires. Explorers, loggers, and hunters began reporting encounters. And what they described sounded like something ripped straight from a nightmare. In 1878, one case in Canada became infamous. A Cree man named Swift Runner lived in isolation with his family through a brutal winter. When the snow finally melted, he was found alone and confessed that he had devoured every member of his family. He claimed he had been possessed by a spirit, the Wendigo, and that the hunger had become unbearable, even with food nearby. For many, that was the first recorded real case of Wendigo possession. Other reports emerged in regions like Minnesota and Alberta. Abandoned trails, blood-soaked camps, and enormous footprints stamped deep in the snow. Hunters swore they heard voices calling their names among the trees, or saw tall, skeletal figures moving too fast to be human. And the strangest thing is that, even today, some people claim to hear the call of the forest. Travelers speak of a presence watching them, even when they're alone. They say the wind changes, grows heavier, almost alive, and the cold becomes so thick it feels like it's breathing with you. There's also the psychological phenomenon known as Wendigo psychosis, documented by anthropologists in the 20th century. Individuals, gripped by delusion, believed they were turning into the creature. They described an unending hunger and a terrifying urge to harm those they loved. To the indigenous peoples, this wasn't madness. It was the spiritual mark of the Wendigo, a hunger that devours not the body, but the soul. But what's truly more terrifying, the thought of a cannibal spirit wandering the frozen woods, or the idea that, under the right conditions, any one of us could become the Wendigo. Maybe the legend isn't just about monsters lurking out there, but about the ones waiting, silently, within. They say the Wendigo never truly disappeared. It still roams the frozen forests, waiting for the right moment to awaken in anyone who dares enter its territory. But maybe it doesn't even need the forests anymore. Perhaps the Wendigo is closer than we think. Think about it. The legend speaks of greed, of endless hunger, of people losing their humanity in exchange for survival. What if the true Wendigo isn't a creature of bones and snow, but a mirror, a reflection of what humans are capable of when fear, hunger, or power takes hold of the soul? The ancient Algonquin tribes believed the Wendigo could hide in anyone. All it took was a weakness, a moment of desperation, and it would enter. Perhaps that's why the myth never died, because it speaks to something that has always existed within us, the temptation to cross boundaries to get what we want. So next time the wind blows stronger at night, or you find yourself alone in a place too quiet, pay attention. If you hear a whisper calling your name, don't answer. It might be just the wind, or it might be him. And if you enjoyed this story, don't forget, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell, because here on Urban Secrets, fear never sleeps.